we are actually going to have, for the first time, and Art touched on it a little bit, a discussion about design considerations, because this is a more holistic approach, and it's not just going out and plowing, but it's also how can we design things better that will reduce those potential impacts. So our first presenter, Pamela Strong, comes to us from Ontario, Canada, and works with the Lake Simcoe Region Conservation Authority, which is dedicated to conserving, restoring, and managing the Lake Simcoe watershed since 1951. I was drawn to their work for design standards focusing on winter maintenance considerations. Pam had a feature article in Landscape Trends magazine on STEP, Sustainable Technologies Evaluation Program, that fosters a broader implementation of technologies that can protect water resources and reduce our carbon footprint. So please welcome Pamela Strong.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. Like Chris said, I come from the Lake Simcoe Region Conservation Authority. We're a pseudo-government organization that our primary goal is to prevent development in the floodplain, but we also do work on environmental monitoring, watershed management, and education. So this is part of we have watershed monitoring and management here. So yeah, this morning I'm excited to talk to you about some of our initiatives that we've been undertaking over the past number of years to try to manage the salt issue in our watershed. So a quick outline of my presentation. First, I'll just go over a bit about the chloride issue in our watershed, and then I'll go through a couple of case studies. The first is our commercial parking lot case study, and then a municipal case study, which is focused on the town of Newmarket. And then, as Chris mentioned, I'll also get into our parking lot design guidelines, and then take a quick look at our contractor procurement guidance and some of the advocacy work that we've been undertaking. So first, a quick intro to the Lake Simcoe watershed. As you can see, circled in orange, or in yellow there, it's just a little bit north of the city of Toronto, about an hour's drive north. The watershed itself is about 1,300 square miles in area. The lake is 280 square miles, so it's a pretty good-sized lake. About 435,000 residents call it home. And we also have about 50,000 seasonal residents. There's a lot of cottages on the area, used both in the summer and in the winter. It's a pretty big ice fishing hub, although that's getting a little bit less reliable over the last couple of decades, but still great lake for ice fishing. It's also an important resource for drinking water. A number of communities draw their drinking water from the lake, and there are a number of groundwater sources as well. And Lake Simcoe is considered a small version of the Great Lakes. So we see a lot of the same issues, a lot of the same invasive species, but at a bit of a smaller scale. So there's a lot of studies that go on Lake Simcoe. It's just a little bit easier to see what might happen in the Great Lakes on this smaller lake. So looking at chloride in the Lake Simcoe watershed, we first identified it as an issue as we developed our sub-watershed plans. So these are management plans for each of the river systems that drain into the lake. We were developing those between 2000 and 2017. Excuse me, up to that point, phosphorus had been seen as the main contaminant of concern in the lake. But as we started to look at our water quality monitoring data and developing those plans, we saw that a lot of the stations in our urban and urbanizing areas were either had high or increasing chloride concentrations. So that was when we saw that chloride is becoming an issue. As you can see from this graph, hopefully you can see, about 20% of the salt in the watershed comes from parking lots, and then about 60% comes from municipal roads, so either regional or local roads. So we decided to focus our reduction efforts on those two sources. They are, I think we calculated once, there was about 200 kilograms of salt going down per person every season, so a lot of salt going down, so we thought it would be good to focus on those two sources. The lake is also under significant development pressure. I think it's one of the fastest growing areas in North America. That 435,000 people that I mentioned in the last slide is slated to grow by about 50% over the next 50 years or so. So as you can see, with all this salt going down, the concentration in the lake is increasing pretty much every year at a pretty steady clip. This is our water quality monitoring station at the outlet of the lake. You can see that it's still below that guideline level that's shown in red there, but it is climbing, and we don't expect it'll be too long before we start seeing impacts to aquatic life. And then if you look at our monitoring stations in the river systems, these dots, the red dots, are stations where the average annual concentration exceeds the acute guidelines, so that's with very deleterious effects to aquatic life. The yellow stations, those are the annual average again. Concentration is above the chronic guideline that you saw in the last slide. But keep in mind, these are annual average concentrations, so that also includes the summer and spring concentrations, so before any salt is being applied, so it's obviously getting into that shallow groundwater system and contributing salty water to our rivers throughout the year. Because we were seeing this, we developed our salt reduction strategy, which identified actions that we could take as an authority on the salt issue in the watershed. And I'll go into those. Oh, forgetting to switch my slides here. There we go. So our approach, as I mentioned, we were looking at municipal roads and parking lots. So for municipal roads, we convened a Lake Simcoe Salt Working Group, which was comprised of urban and urbanizing municipalities within our watershed. Some of these municipalities had already started to look at their practices and see where they could make reductions. Others were a little more entrenched in their thinking, saying, well, we've been doing this for years, it works, why would we change it? So part of that was to share information and sort of maybe create a bit of peer pressure and have some of those municipalities start thinking a little bit more, well, if that town is going to straight salt or to using liquids, maybe we should think about that too. We also conducted a benchmarking survey just to establish with the municipalities what everyone was doing, different types of roads, different types of weather systems, just to sort of get an idea of what was happening in the lake, where we could focus on making changes, and then also, again, to ask those questions of the municipalities. Why are you doing what you're doing? And maybe get them thinking a little bit about how they could make some changes. And the next thing that we did was the Town of Newmarket case study, which I will talk about in a couple of slides. So we've done a number of things for parking lots. The first was research to better understand the issue. So looking at behavioral, it's not hard, but trying to understand exactly what it was that was driving contractors to apply more salt than was needed. We conducted monitoring to see what was happening, what was going down on the parking lots in different conditions, looking at our stormwater ponds, and we're seeing similar things in our stormwater ponds that have been observed in the lake here, where there is that stratification, the chemical stratification. So the ponds aren't working as they're supposed to. Instead of coming in and the water getting cycled, it's just sort of shooting right out over that top layer, or the dense bottom layer. So trying to understand what's going on there and how we could change it. And then we also did friction testing, so looking at different types of weather systems and how they affect different surfaces and different types of treatment as well. And spoiler alert, too much salt is actually as slippery as an icy surface. So it's actually really not helpful to apply more than is needed. We developed the parking lot design guidelines, which I'll talk about. We held a number of Smart About Salt training sessions. So for interested contractors, these training sessions showed them how to properly use salt, understanding how it works, because a lot of people, they do landscaping in the summer and they throw the hopper on the truck in the winter and they just put salt down because that's what you do. So just helping everyone to understand how the salt works and maybe to help apply more properly, I guess, for a better way of putting it. And then we also convened a freshwater roundtable. This was a group of commercial property owners. There were representatives from all levels of government, contractors, and conservation authorities. And this group was to discuss the parking lot issue, because a lot of parking lot owners and managers don't even know, I mean, they just think more salt is better. So just bringing to the forefront the knowledge that too much salt isn't great, and there are things that property managers can do as well as contractors to control that amount of salt. So I'm going to discuss this in a little bit more detail later on. So, that was supposed to be an animation. That's okay, we'll just talk about it. There we go. Okay, so this is our parking lot case study. So this was a large commercial parking lot within the Lake Simcoe watershed, one of the big ones with a Walmart and 30 other stores. There were 2 contractors over the period of the study. So the first, contractor A, was from 2014 to 2018. And contractor B has been maintaining the site since 2018. Both the contractors had similar equipment. They both used salt, but they just approached the maintenance differently. So we developed this case study to sort of highlight how those differences change how much salt is going down. The primary concerns for both contractors were safety and liability. I'm sure it is here as well, but it's gotten to be a really, really significant issue in our area. So those are obviously their main concerns. So looking at the difference between the two, contractor A had a more typical application. They applied at every event, regardless of the event type, regardless of the conditions that were already at the site. They had a high application rate, about 80 grams per meter squared. And yeah, they went out regardless, and you'll see in the data in a minute how that affected things. Contractor B, on the other hand, had some of that training. They used best practices. They actually had a staff person go out to the site and see what the conditions were. When there was an event coming, they were able to see, there's residual salt, or just to tailor what they wanted to do to maintain that site and achieve their goal for maintenance. And they were able to tailor that application rate. So looking at the results, this graph here shows the average amount of salt that was applied per event. So every time they went out, contractor A, as you can see in blue, applied about 12 tons, and contractor B in red applied about 10 tons. So that's every single event that they go out for, they're applying on average 2 tons less. And then looking at this graph here, this is the average number of applications per season. So you can see that contractor A went out a lot more often than contractor B did. And the hatched line over the top of the graph shows the winter season precipitation. So you can see that the conditions aren't really appreciably different between the two contractors. There was one snowy year for contractor A, but they go out more often. So just showing that they're not really necessarily paying attention to what's going on the site. And I think the other important thing to note here as well is that both contractors were claim-free for the duration of the study. So looking at the successes from the case study, I think given that neither contractor had an insurance claim over the course of this study, I think it demonstrates that best practices can be used and safe conditions on the site can be maintained. So you can reduce the number of applications, you can reduce the amount of salt being applied, and still maintain those safe sites. It also shows the importance of assessing on-site conditions. So whether or not you can have a person that can go out, or there's a lot of technology now that can be used, remote cameras, to keep an eye on the site and just do what's needed instead of just going out and applying salt regardless. And the cost of that technology can also be pretty easily offset. You can see from the third bullet point there, average salt savings, we were estimating about $100 per ton of salt, $40,000 per season. So it would be pretty easy to offset the cost of any technology that you need to use. Some of the challenges that were encountered, obviously, if you are going to use those best practices, you need training and knowledge, and this can be a challenge to maintain because there is a high rate of staff turnover. We find that there's the owners and they're there, but a lot of the staff changes every year, so it's kind of hard to maintain that knowledge. It does definitely take more work to plan, to tailor applications based on the site conditions. Costs can be prohibitive, so again, things like those on-site cameras, subscriptions to weather services, speed-controlled application devices. So for a smaller contractor, they can see that as prohibitive, but again, as you can see from those, just the salt savings, never mind the fewer applications and having the drivers going out less often, the cost savings can be significant. And then the last thing that we found that it can be difficult to change contractor behavior, regardless of who had the training, the accessible parking spots, the sidewalks in front of stores, there was always a lot of salt. Contractor B at times would actually go back and sweep some of it up. So they knew that it was too much, but not everyone's going to do that. So I think the more you can automate and just train the staff, and I think it's just sort of over time, it's going to become more normalized to apply less, but we're still working on it. So our town of Newmarket case study. Newmarket is a medium-sized municipality in our watershed, about 80,000 people. And they had been, as you can see in the graph there, until 2014, 2015, applying a sand-salt mix. So I think their application rate of that mix was, they varied the amount of salt in the mix, but I think they were at about 60% sand by the time they made the switch. So their application rate was a lot. They were going out and I think it was 250 kilograms per lane kilometer. So I'm not sure what that translates into in miles, but a heavy mix, and they were having to go back to the yard and refill a lot, so it was short routes. So they decided to make this shift to using straight salt. They actually shifted to a treated salt product called Varox. As you can see from the graph there in blue, when they did make that switch, the amount of chloride reduced drastically. So they were finding what they had to do was have so much salt in the sand salt mix. They were applying so much, it was actually a really high rate of application of salt. They were able to drop that to about 80 kilograms per lane kilometer once they started with the treated salt. So about by half. However, if you look at the red line above the graph there, that shows the number of treatments that they're going out and doing each season, and it starts to increase towards the end of the timeline there, and that becomes important when we look at how everything has shaken out. This graph shows the chloride application rate with the winter collision rate overlain in red there. So you can see that even with that shift in 2015, 2016, they were able to maintain safe sites. The collision rate actually decreased. So that was great. They were able to make that shift. No one really noticed. Everything was safe. So it was great. But as I mentioned, the reductions that they were achieving in the application rate were being offset by the increased number of applications. So looking at the successes, obviously they were able to transition from the sand-salt mix to treated sand and reduce their application rates. And they were able to do this while maintaining safe conditions. Excuse me. They also achieved a number of ancillary benefits, reduced materials costs per trip, a reduction in the number of vehicle trips, so you don't have to go back to the yard as often, the routes are longer, and that's a savings in vehicle maintenance, fuel consumption, and operator time as well. They were able to increase the lifespan for their stormwater infrastructure. So when you're not applying sand in the mix, your catch basins don't fill up as quickly, your stormwater ponds don't fill up as quickly, so there's less maintenance. And then also there's a reduced spring cleanup effort. So sending the street sweepers out, they're really just picking up the detritus from the fall, leaf litter and that type of thing. When they did sweep up the sand, it's actually considered contaminated waste, so there's actually an additional cost to dispose of that. So there's a savings there as well. So the main challenge that we found was the higher number of applications. So as you saw from that graph, they started going out more and more often. So we talked to the municipality and actually a number of other municipalities and asked why they are going out more often. The first is public expectation. Again, it's a growing area. There are a lot of people moving from more southern areas or from other countries where there may not be snow. A lot of people don't expect that they need to drive or walk or wear footwear any differently than they would in July. So it's a public expectation. You can try to educate people and say, maybe wear boots instead of the 4-inch stilettos, but you can't change public behavior. So that's a big pressure. The minimum maintenance standards. Ontario, the provincial government requires certain levels of service. And just recently they've made a change where if there's an expectation of ice accretion, you have to go out and apply. So a lot of municipalities are going out if there's any chance of a storm where there might be some ice. So I think that's driving a lot of the applications. Again, growth and development, so there's just a lot more people using the roads. So I think there's just a tendency to try to keep those roads clear. And then climate change is another one that's being cited fairly often. The operators are saying that they're seeing more freeze-thaw cycles. We're not 100% sure we're seeing that much of that in the data, but it is something that we want to take a further look at. So shifting gears to our parking lot design guidelines that Chris mentioned. So as I mentioned before, parking lots are a significant contributor to the chloride load in the watershed. It was about 20% in 2015, and there's been a lot of growth in the intervening periods. So this graph here shows how the impervious surfaces in our watershed have changed over time, and parking lots have grown more than any other type of impervious surface. So there's a lot of parking lots, a lot of shopping centers, a lot of condos. So yeah, a lot of that parking lot area. And a huge concern, obviously, for parking lot contractors is liability. They apply way more salt than is needed because they feel that it protects them from liability. So we designed these guidelines as one facet of what's needed to see less salt applied in parking lots. The goal of the project was to design parking lots that inherently need less salt applied to achieve the same level of service without increasing exposure to liability for contractors. The good thing about the design guidelines is that they're proactive, so municipalities can incorporate them into their planning documents, require that when designs come in, that they use at least some of these, some of the features in the guidelines. So the guideline package includes a number of different things. It has detailed design drawings and fact sheets for 4 different features. The first is grading and stormwater collection, snow pile placement and design, pedestrian flow and walkways, and landscaping features. We also included 4 site plan scenarios. So these show how all of those 4 features that I just mentioned could be incorporated into a site design. So whether it's a small, medium, or large commercial facility or an institutional site. So for this example, we used a school. We also worked with our municipal partners to develop policies that could be included in official plans or engineering design guidelines so that these can be incorporated to plans as they come in. And then there's also a fact sheet, and it's really just a high-level summary of the guidelines. And I actually left a few copies of that on one of the tables out in the lobby if anyone's interested. Okay, so I'm going to go through each of the features that are described in the guidelines. So the first is effective grading and stormwater collection. So the design considerations for this are firstly using grades between 2% and 4%. So you want to make sure that the water is moving where it needs to move quickly enough that it's not going to refreeze. Looking at grading away from building entrances, minimizing the distance of meltwater to catch basins. So if you can see in the picture there, there's a snow pile, there's no catch basin in sight, and it's just melting across that parking lot area. Really high likelihood for refreezing and requiring more salt. So trying to minimize things like this. Directing roof leaders towards pervious surfaces or to stormwater infrastructure, like a catch basin, but never directing them onto paved surfaces. Implementing low-impact development features to minimize the amount of paved surfaces that require salting. And so there's a site design diagram for each of the features as well. So I know it's probably hard to see, but if you look at that blue hatch square, that would show the area of a parking lot that should be draining to a catch basin. So you kind of want to reduce the area that's draining to reduce Again, the amount of refreezing, it shows the grade there at 2 to 4%. I don't have a laser pointer, but on the left there, it has roof leaders either draining to a catch basin or there's a bioretention facility at the top there. On the right side of the screen, there's a bioswale, and there are curb cuts, so that part of the parking lot would be draining towards that bioswale. So again, it's really just all about making sure the water goes where it needs to go quickly enough that it's not going to cause an issue. Oh, there should be some text here. There we go. Oh, okay, so next we have sidewalk design and pedestrian flow. So just thinking about efficient, intuitive use of sidewalks. So a lot of parking lots just put sidewalks kind of everywhere. Most of the time, human nature, we're not going to use it. So if there's a direct route from your car to the door, you're going to take that. You're not going to walk 100 yards that way to take a sidewalk. So just really focusing it on routes that people are going to use. So coming from transit stops, coming from subdivisions, that type of thing. Oh, actually, we missed a... Sorry, can we go back a slide? Another one? There we go. Yes, sorry, we missed snowpiles. So we'll go back to that one in a second. But snowpile storage, location, and design. It's not something that necessarily a lot of people give thought to. You just kind of put it wherever there's a spot. But really thinking about it can actually affect areas that need to be resalted. So placing snowpiles along the down gradient edges of parking lots, either draining to a retention feature or a catch basin, away from major pedestrian routes, and also downwind is preferable, so you don't have that snow blowing back across the parking lot. Ensuring that catch basins are placed immediately down gradient of the snow pile. Placing the snow storage piles on impervious surfaces so that they can drain where they need to. Also clearly marking the snow storage area. So if you can see in the picture there, I know it just says no parking, but you can use different signs. But not everyone, or not every site is going to have the same contractor going out every night. So having signage or hatched markings clearly showing where the snow piles should go, make sure that the snow goes in the right place, and then again, it's not going to cause any further issues. Locating piles in areas that receive a lot of solar radiation to help with melting. And then also, where possible, dedicating several areas to snow storage so that if an area is blocked off or if you get a snowy winter, there are designated areas where contractors know where to put the snow. So this one's pretty straightforward, but it's just showing the main snow pile on the right there. It's on the far end from the building. It's draining into a bioswale. And then there are designated overflow areas on the top and bottom there. So pretty simple, but it's just another important consideration. Okay, so here we go, sidewalk design. So I talked about it a little bit. Find where I am here. Yeah, so ensuring that sidewalks are direct and intuitive and designed for main pedestrian routes only. Minimizing walkways where they're not useful. Minimizing islands, so using less or fewer but larger vegetated islands where possible. So what we want to avoid is that concrete monstrosity in the top picture there. No one except whoever's in that truck is going to use that island, and they've salted the crap out of it. I can't remember, I think it was like 200 grams per meter squared. We measured what was on that. But when you get those islands, it's concrete, so there's a tendency, you feel you need to apply salt, but no one's going to use that. So the salt just piles up, and it's just not necessary. So avoiding that. Ensuring that walkways are wide enough to accommodate snowplow machinery. So you can see on the bottom picture there, that sidewalk is nice and wide and straight. You could get a sidewalk plowed on that. It'll apply the right amount of salt or sand out of the hopper in the back. And so you don't need to worry about someone out there with a bucket and a shovel, just applying whatever they feel is necessary. So considering that. Selecting materials that won't promote the ponding of meltwater. So as was mentioned, the sidewalks in Lake Placid, concrete for whatever reason seems to work better. So really thinking about what materials you're using so that you're not creating issues with the material that the sidewalk is made of. Eliminating partially covered walkways, so those can cause issues if there's dripping or the buildup of snow along the edge of the walkway. But considering things like heated walkways, maybe around building entrances. So you often see a lot of the building infrastructure, like the tracks for metal doors or carpets, get ruined by salt being tracked in. If you use just one small area of a heated walkway, you can avoid some of those issues. And then again, pretty simple drawing just showing how to incorporate this into a design, but you can see there's a bus stop on the bottom there. I'm not sure where that top one's supposed to be draining from, maybe a subdivision or something, but just really direct. There aren't a lot of islands. There's a bit of vegetation along the walkway, and there's a heated walkway near the main entrance. And then the final feature we look at is landscaping. So this is another way that maybe a lot of people don't think that you can use landscaping to reduce salt application, but you can. The big thing to think about here is facilitating the movement of the plows around the site. So that bottom picture looks beautiful, lots of nice low impact development features, but that would be an absolute nightmare to navigate with a snow plow. So trying to save those features for closer to the buildings or around the edge of the property. But keeping those drive lanes very clear. Also thinking about the vegetation, using native salt-tolerant plants that aren't invasive, encouraging the planting along the property boundary, and including bioretention features, again, to help with the drainage. Giving preference to vegetated islands over concrete, again, to reduce those areas that need to be salted. Planting deciduous trees with high canopies along walkways. So in the summer you get shade, but in the winter you can get that solar radiation that will help the snow to melt. Based on the predominant wind direction, you can also look at planting treed windbreaks along the perimeter of the property if you have space. And again, that'll help with any blowing. And then just for decorative purposes, considering the use of raised planters. So if you don't want to include all salt-tolerant vegetation, if you use a raised planter, it's not going to be exposed to the salty water as much. So this is the design drawing for that. So again, just very simple use of vegetation. You can see the bioretention feature, deciduous trees along the walkway, and then those vegetated islands near the building entrance. And then at the bottom there, there's a planter box that has the roof leader actually draining into it. So I know this is a nightmare to look at, but this is one of those site plan designs that I showed you. This is our large commercial property example. So what you're seeing here is how to incorporate all 4 of those features into one site plan. So you can see sort of the blue hatched area sort of on the right, showing what's draining to a catch basin. It shows where the roof leaders drain into stormwater infrastructure, the snow pile placement. So again, it's just showing how all of those features, if you were designing a site, just how you can think about it a little differently and incorporate those features. So some of the successes we've seen, we've had several of our Lake Simcoe watershed municipalities that have incorporated these into their planning documents. And we've had interest from a number of other Lake Simcoe municipalities, as well as from others in the Greater Toronto area. The challenge, though, it's a new approach, so it's going to take time to become more mainstream. There are, like I said, only a few Lake Simcoe municipalities who are requiring it. So yeah, I mean, it's just going to take education. There's a schedule for updating official plans, so it'll just take time to be implemented. It's also difficult to tell if it's working. So if someone does design a parking lot using these guidelines, how do you know if the contractor is applying less salt and whether it's because of the design? So to look at that, we'd like, as next steps, to conduct a case study to assess the effectiveness of the guidelines. So just a quick overview of the procurement guidelines. These were actually developed by one of our partner agencies, the Toronto and Region Conservation Authority. They're intended to help property and building managers work with contractors to achieve reduced salt application. So it provides tips on how to use these contracts to control the amount of salt, It includes a number of different options, as well as what their salt reduction potential is. So not every option you include in a contract is going to reduce salt, but some of them will help. But it's just interesting that they have that sort of salt reduction potential. So if that's really your interest, you can focus on those options. There's a number of templates. There's diagrams and maps included as well, so that you're educated and are able to work with the contractor to help implement those. So the types of things that are included are financial incentives for using less salt, requiring calibrated speed-controlled equipment, using more efficient application methods like direct liquid application or pre-wetting or anti-icing. Record keeping is another important one. It comes up a lot in Ontario. Can be used to fight litigation. It's not as much as we would like for it to be, but if the records are there, then you can see that the salt is being applied as you're asking for it. Just asking for reduced application rates. Simple, but hopefully effective. And then also requiring training or certification. So like I mentioned, we did hold some of those training programs. A lot of municipalities are looking to require more contractors that have that training. So we're hoping that sort of spurs more contractors to get the training. So the more people ask for it, the more we'll get it. But that's available. I think there's a sheet with some links, but that's on the Sustainable Technologies Evaluation Program website. And then finally, I just wanted to talk a little bit about how our Conservation Authority has been advocating for change. We see this as another facet in addressing the parking lot issue. So as I mentioned, liability claims have been increasing. That's led to more payouts and increasing premium and deductible charges for contractors. These costs have forced many out of business in the industry. And there are some contractors that are raising the specter that there won't be enough of them to maintain sites around Southern Ontario. It's just become too litigious. So we convened the Freshwater Roundtable to discuss potential solutions to the issue aimed at protecting the industry, maintaining safety, and reducing the amount of salt that's applied. So we're really looking for that triple bottom line. We want to help the industry for sure. We want safety. But at the end, what we're really looking for is that reduced salt application. So there was broad support among the Freshwater Roundtable group for the New Hampshire model. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with that. But what we like about it is the liability protection for contractors who receive snow and ice training. We see that as being just, I don't know that the salt application that we're hoping for can happen if there isn't protection from liability, because there's too much hesitancy to use those best practices if they know they're going to get sued anyway. So that's a big one. But then also putting the onus on the claimant to prove that the contractor was negligent. So as long as you have those records, you should be able to prove that you're doing what you should. We live in a climate with winter, so there is an expectation that individuals will take some responsibility for themselves. So it's been a bit of an uphill battle. We make some headway, and then there's a change in the Minister of the Environment, but we are going to keep supporting the industry and pushing for this regulation that will relieve pressure and improve environmental outcomes. And with that, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Pamela. That was a really great start. Are there any questions for Pamela?
I've got the mic. Sorry, my hand up. Kevin Stanish from Adirondack Customs over here on your right.
Hi there.
I had a question about your example on the proper sidewalk that you showed.
Yeah.
To me, I'm a private snow contractor, not a municipality. That sidewalk has raised curbs on both sides, plantings, and then vehicle parking. Why is that an ideal example for you? Because to me, with the sidewalk machine, you're going to have to blow that with raised curbs.
Right, okay. Yeah,
and then
that's
you've
fair.
got cars next to it, you've got plantings next to it. To push that as a ideal doesn't make sense to me.
Okay, yeah, that's fair. You know what, that's probably just a poor choice of photo. We were focusing on the width and not what's around it, but yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah, so width, not planters. I'll change that photo.
Hello? Oh, yeah, there you go. Sorry. Dan Kelting, Paul Smith College. Looking at your site design plans, they look very detailed and expensive, I suppose, for, say, a developer to want to invest the financial resources into those ideas. And I'm just curious are there any financial incentives within your province to assist developers in that regard?
There are some programs. It depends on where you are in the province. Conservation authorities like ours, we do have some funding. For things like the bioretention facilities, we actually have requirements for water balance. So that helps, it incentivizes the developer to implement those features. A lot of it is really just drainage. And I mean, maybe I'm naive, but I think, like by building fewer sidewalks, for example, or fewer islands, I think, just to simplify that design. And in some cases, like the snow pile storage, it's really just, it's placement, it's a sign. And I mean, it's really sort of a choose your own adventure, whatever works for your site, whatever you want to implement. So I think, I mean, obviously the heated walkways are going to be an investment, but then you also look at that compared to replacing the tracks on metal doorways or replacing carpets or whatever. So I think that's just a cost assessment that needs to be undertaken. So yeah, I mean, it would be nice if we do have some parking lot redevelopments happening in the watershed, so we're hoping to work with the designers to see. There just aren't a lot of great examples to assess what the additional costs are.
Hello there. Have you done any monitoring to track water quality improvements from, all the BMPs or the salt reduction strategies?
We haven't as an authority. Well, that's not. We have the parking lot case study that we did. We actually had a conductivity monitor in a stormwater pond on the site. So that's how we assessed how much salt was going down. Because I think the entire site drained to that pond, so we were able to just see, if the conductivity was much higher, so we were able to average that over the parking lot. So for the first contractor, we were able to see that they were applying a lot more. And we do have our partner agencies, again, with that Sustainable Technologies program, that have actually done, looking at how much salt is reduced by using those practices.
Hello, Mary Beth DeGray, concerned citizen of the North Country. I have a question. This may not be directly to you, but someone in the room might know. I'm a novice at all this. I'm just learning about all of this. But is the New York State Environmental Facilities Corp in the room? Because there's grant money available to help municipalities with mitigation. Does anybody know about that in this room? Just curious. Board of Health has also funds available to help with mitigation, to help drinking water? No? Nobody in this room knows about that. Okay.
Well, if I could.
Oh, of course.
Yeah, sorry,
yeah.
Pam.
Sorry.
Well, I think there are some grants available through New York State DEC, not the Facilities Corp. DEC is out in the lobby, so I think you could find out some more about that. So I'd like to thank Pamela for this. It was a great way to start our event, so thank you very much.